How did Jesus look like as an adult? His appearance is not described in the Bible. All we know from there is that he did not stand out from other 30-something-year-old men. But his looks have been a hot subject of debate these last decades. Did he have a beard? Long hair? Was it straight or curly? Did he have a muscular body or was he very thin? And perhaps most controversially of all, what was his skin color? Before studying this topic in some depth, I looked at the hundreds of artworks I have stored on my computer in which Jesus is depicted as an adult, and the results were even more consistent than I expected. In almost all paintings, Jesus has long hair, at least running until his shoulders and often even a bit longer. And notice how his hair is almost always parted in the middle. Other common characteristics are his beard, relatively long face and almond-shaped eyes. I really had to look very hard to find any artwork where his hair was not long, and this painting from 1554 entitled Christ on the Mount of Olives by Jan Sanders van Hemesen is the closest it would get. At least after studying this painting for a while, it seems that Jesus' hair does not seem to run till his shoulders. But it's not even a great example, as the colors surrounding his head are pretty dark. What is more clear though is that none of his disciples has long hair, and I'm not aware of any artwork in history where Jesus was depicted, for example, as a balding figure. Of course, it must exist somewhere, and if you know any such work, definitely let us know in the comment section down below, but that would really be an exception. The other defining feature of Jesus is the presence of a beard, although it is a little bit easier to find examples where Jesus appears with no facial hair, like this relatively modern version from 1933 by Alois Wack, entitled Christ with Crown of Thorns and Triangular Halo. But especially in images from areas where the Eastern Orthodox Church is popular, the beard is almost always there. The simple reason that Jesus is almost always depicted with long hair and a beard is that we can then easily recognize him in an artwork, which was for centuries the primary motivation of religious art, that common people would be able to see biblical scenes in a visual way. There was one other way to identify Jesus, which was used for a while, which is the cruciform halo, typically a golden halo with a red cross around his head. But as the image of a bearded man with long hair was so easy to recognize, this halo has been abandoned over time. Soon we will get into the question on whether Jesus really had long hair or not, but let's first consider the more controversial one, which is his skin color. In the paintings shown so far, Jesus is always depicted as from the Caucasian race. The word Caucasian is a pretty broad term which includes people from Europe, North Africa, and West, South and Central Asia. But more than labeling his appearance as Caucasian, in many cases Jesus has a pretty light skin, which is not exactly how the average person in the Middle East looks like today. And just as a disclaimer, I am not trying to use any stereotypes here or discriminate in any way. As you will see soon, the simple explanation for the skin color of Jesus in art is that most artists would just paint Jesus after a local model or sitter. So when Raphael painted his work in 1506 entitled Christ's Blessing, he just picked up a model from his local city of Florence to pose for him. And at that time, it was popular to paint biblical people as fairly muscular. So adding some long hair and a short beard that is hard to notice, and Raphael created a perfectly acceptable image of Jesus for his local audience. But if Raphael would be surrounded by people of a different skin color, Jesus would have looked different as well. So who is right? Raphael? No, of course not, because Jesus did not come from Florence. He came from Bethlehem and Nazareth, near Jerusalem. And so there have been artists who dug a little bit deeper in depicting Jesus, and they traveled to that area and captured a man with a skin complexion more likely to fit how Jesus would have looked like back in the day, which usually gets to a somewhat darker olive brown skin. Putting aside any discussion on the true existence of Jesus, why don't we know how he looked like? Surely someone must have described him accurately or made a drawing of Jesus. Well, that is why things are complicated. During the life of Jesus and in the 3 centuries after that, there was a widespread belief that no images of God and Jesus could be made, known with an expensive word as Aniconism. The reason is the second commandment from the Torah, which states, "You must not make idols. Don't make any statues or pictures of anything up in the sky, or of anything on the earth, or of anything down in the water. Don't worship or serve idols of any kind, because I, the Lord, am your God. I hate my people worshipping other gods." This commandment was interpreted that it was completely forbidden to even make a descriptive image of Jesus. And just to be clear, there are still several movements within the Christian religion that are against images of Jesus today, and more that are still opposed to any depictions of God. But generally, by the 3rd century, the idea of not depicting Jesus started to change slowly, and it became somewhat accepted that you could make an image of Jesus, just as long as you would not worship that image. Quickly, the idea emerged of Jesus as a bearded man with long hair, looks that were associated with a charismatic and wise man, as some philosophers from the past were described as looking like that, and how some of the important mythological gods were also depicted before. This is an icon painting from the 6th century called Christ Pantocrator. If I would show this image to random people around the world, most people would recognize this as a depiction of Jesus. And so the way in which Jesus has been depicted in Western art has basically not changed much over the last 15 centuries. It will probably be an eternal debate how Jesus looked like exactly, and it very much depends on what sources you believe. But if I simplify the problem to what the Bible writes about Jesus, we may get the basic idea. The New Testament mentions that the appearance of Jesus did not particularly stand out. Remember how Judas had to identify Jesus from among his followers by giving him a kiss. If it exactly happened like that, Jesus would not look like some charismatic, Zeus-like character with long hair and a big beard, as that was not how the average man looked like back in the day. Instead, we would have to answer the question on how Jewish Galileans looked like 2000 years ago. And in that context, it is unlikely that he had, for example, blonde hair and blue eyes, and more likely that he had brown eyes, short dark brown to black hair, a beard, an olive brown skin, and a height around 165 centimeters or 5 feet 5 inches, which was the average length back in the day in that area. But in the end, art doesn't need to be realistic. For a long time, and still to some extent today, art also has a functional and aesthetic purpose. If I would paint a gathering of Jesus and his disciples, and you have no clue who is who, as they all look pretty similar, that would also be strange. Well, there's much more to say on this topic, but I leave it here for this video. Let me know your thoughts on the appearance of Jesus and which artworks come to mind first when you think about how he looks like. And based on that, I may make a follow-up video on this subject in the future. Finally, I hope you found this interesting, and if so, please like and subscribe. And thanks for watching.